Finally, I'm done with the first Yanagiba. I was going to conclude this video last time, but it was already getting super long and I had a few more closing thoughts that I wanted to add on. It's been a really long journey to get to this point. I was not expecting for it to take this long. I kind of just thought that I would learn how to grind these, it'd be done. Clearly not the case. So it's taken me a lot longer than expected, but I'm really happy with where my skills are now. These are still really tough for me. I haven't found any easy solutions still, but I've gotten a lot better as a knife maker, and these are, I'd say, manageable. Tough, but manageable. I mean, when I first started making these, I thought they were just literally impossible. It's been so long since I've been practicing that I don't even know what's what anymore. It's a different kind of challenge than, like, say, this sci-fi knife that I made. That one was more an exercise in ideas, whereas this is just straight up like pure execution. Like, idea simple, just hard to make. So what are my takeaways? Number one, I need to get these in the hands of people who actually know how to use them. I don't know how to use it. Like I shouldn't own this even though I made it, because I'm not doing it justice. Like, I don't make sushi, I don't cut fish like that. I'm using it for like steaks and shit. I think I'm on the right track with these, but I'm often wrong. And since I don't know how to use these, I can't make any real judgments. So I have to get them tested by people who know. In the last video, I said gluing sandpaper to a sanding stick isn't a super efficient method. I lied. So immediately after filming that, I made this, which is basically a sanding stick with a radius going this way. So you take off the paper, it's got feathering adhesive on it, so you could just throw on a different sheet on there. Like that. And then I just go to town. I just scrub a lot. And I'm being pretty careful not to hit these edges out here. Just kind of chase up and creep as close as I can. This actually works really well. I'm dumb for saying it last time, but this works really well. I don't even use those stones anymore on that pneumatic stone holding thingamabob. What I found is if your grind is really good, which is the most important part anyways, using the sanding stick is going to get out a lot of these irregularities, smooth out the surface, and give you a nice clean ura. The key thing is, of course, grinding it really well. So like this one probably needs some work. You can see a lot of like the waviness in there. It'll actually take a lot of that out, but you don't want anything too severe. So at this stage, this one's pretty rough. I would probably go back to the grinder and clean up a lot of this mess, but just giving you a good idea. Once I'm done with a lot of the rough sanding like this, and I'm ready to do the final sanding, then I'll use that one that I talked about last video, the one where you can kind of just like fold it over and just kind of like rotate it through the paper. So this one is nice to just do your final strokes. So get some sandpaper on there, wrap it tight, start back here. So between these two work pretty well. I don't use those stones. I just grind as best as I can and then start sanding with this. So what I'm finding when I'm grinding the ura is the long flat section. Let's do a little bit of the long flat section is pretty easy to do. I just lock it in there. I've got the whole footprint of the wheel and the belt that's kind of indexing it in, and I can grind this whole section pretty cleanly and easily. It's when I get towards this front area where I have to be really careful, because once I get around here, it's no longer grinding in the entire surface. It's grinding on the two edges of the belt. So what I found is I have to basically grind and be really careful and feather in the front belly and tip area like that. I just ease into it, being cautious not to put pressure back here, and then focusing a lot of my attention to the front edge right here. My goal isn't really to get a perfect grind right off the grinder. I think that's a little bit much to ask for with this setup. I'm not really sure if there's a really, truly good way to do it, but I'm getting it close enough so that when I go to the sandpaper, it can clean a lot of that up and get it really nice. So I'm putting most of my pressure with my left hand and none towards the back right here. Do a sweep, check. Do a sweep, check. One thing is, you'll notice that it kind of like wobbles a lot and kind of catches. Using a fresh belt really helps so that you don't have to use a lot of pressure. The more pressure you use, the more it's going to want to try to catch and bounce and skip, and the more it's going to try to conform and wash out these lines. So fresh belts is key. I'm also trying not to overgrind this top line right here. So when I do that part, I just flip it around, spine up, and I basically feel the curve on the wheel and the belt. I can't see what I'm doing, but through enough practice, I can just kind of roll it in there, apply pressure, and just follow that curve. So essentially what I'm doing is converging these two hollow grinds towards the tip and meeting in the center right there. And then the last thing that I'm struggling with is still warp. I was hoping it would be a little bit easier, but it's not. This is still the trickiest part for me. Like I've figured out how to grind these, I've figured out how to finish them, but being able to dial in that last tiny bit is more practice, being able to see better, and then just pattern recognition, I guess. Part of the reason why they're so difficult is because there is no room for error. You don't have any leeway with it. With a chef's knife or double bevel, like, it doesn't have to be 100% perfect. You can get away with the edge not being like totally dead nuts straight. You can sharpen it out, it'll cut, well, it'll be fine to maintain as long as there's no massive problems. With these, when I'm doing the sharpening, for example, the hamaguri sharpening, what I was noticing was that when I was doing my sharpening and flattening and stuff like that, when I lay this flat on here and thin out the edge to basically the 0 that I need, I would hit certain spots and not others. So for example, I'm hitting the very heel right here. I'm definitely hitting up towards the belly here, but there's a section where it's being really stubborn and it's not actually hitting the stone. I could try going super ham and like taking this all the way down and taking this all the way down, but that's going to change the profile, and I don't think that'll actually fix the problem. And so that tells me that it's not straight, even though when I sight down, it looks straight to me. I can't really, my eyes start getting strained and I have no idea what I'm looking at anymore. And then sometimes I think it'll be slightly warped in that section at the edge. And then I look at the spine and the spine's straight. So there's some weird twisting or something going on. And it is so difficult to chase that little tiny bit of distortion and then try to fix it and get it straight so that it like sharpens and functions properly. Like I said, it's doable, but it's a lot of back and forth. Like I thought I was done the last video, and then when I was finishing it, it was like, oh wait, no, it's not actually done. It's just a huge time sink to get it really close as you can, see where it is, correct that warp or twist or buckle or whatever, slightly past where it should be so that when you finish it again, it should come back straight. So here's the big unanswered question that I've kind of been talking about throughout all these videos. Is a compound ura necessary? It is so much work. Making this knife is already a feat in itself. Grinding that hollow on the back is already a feat in itself. And then to try to add on a compound, complex geometry in the back adds even another layer of complexity. For such a subtle difference, why is it even done? John Broida said it's to help promote longevity over repeated sharpenings throughout the years, and also to help aid food release without having that hollow grind be too deep. Let's just draw a simple graph of like time or your sharpenings or whatever versus your width. For a simple radius, you're essentially looking at a linear line, and then this would just be your point of like the ura being so wide that you need a regrind or an overhaul or whatever. With the compound ura, you're essentially just making it a little bit more exponential, so that in this region you have more of you maintain that functionality for a little bit longer. Another aspect of the compound ura is It essentially allows you to control the depth of the grind throughout the length, regardless of what the width is. So like, for example, like if you just stuck with one single radius and you're making an Asuba, for example, this is much wider than this one. So let's say you're using a 36-inch radius for a Yanagiba. If you go use that on an Asuba, that depth is going to be severe. Like it's going to be way, way deeper. But if you go to, like, let's say a 72-inch radius, it might give you the same depth, but the angle between the flat section and the hollow is going to be so much more subtle that it's going to make it trickier to get that uraoshi tight. And then also as you're sharpening, it's going to be very linear as far as like the uraoshi like widening over time. So then the question is, does it truly matter if it's a compound ura or a simple radius? Assuming they're both made really well, who would actually notice and care? John Broida does, because he deals with and sharpens these like more than anybody else I know. And so the knives he works with have to uphold a certain standard. Would it matter to an experienced cook? Maybe, maybe not. My guess is they can adjust and adapt to what they're using. Then what about a new cook? Somebody who's new to using one of these knives? Maybe. When learning most things, like you generally want something that performs and maintains fairly standard. You don't want something that cuts like way out of the norm. It could easily make it really frustrating if you're trying to troubleshoot something and it's not quite working. There's also an inherent difference in how use and maintenance are viewed between like Japanese bladesmiths and Western bladesmiths. Over here, we generally shoulder all of the work from start to finish, including repairs and long-term maintenance, whereas in Japan, that's not really the workflow that they have. So the logic behind a compound ura makes more sense when you're thinking about it through longevity over repeated sharpenings over and over. But for Western makers, it's quite different, where most of us are usually pretty happy to take back a knife, give it a spa treatment, and regrind what needs to be reground. So then, what is the right answer? I don't think there is one. I think the maker has to balance their own pros and cons in their decision, and then basically establish an agreement and understanding between them and their customers. For me, I've been practicing these so much that like grinding the ura is no longer the hardest part. I can grind a compound ura now pretty easily, including like the curvy bits in the very tip. The hardest part is still that last bit of warp or twist or whatever. I don't have an easy, efficient way of dealing with that yet. Probably just more practice. God, this fucking fly needs to fuck off! Get over here, you stupid little bitch. Little bitch! Fuck! Bitch! So then the question